I'm going to do something exceptionally difficult. I've wanted to argue this for the longest time because it's exceptionally difficult to argue this and have a position that doesn't sound like you're being blatantly racist. And that is, I want to argue that hate speech cannot actually be a real thing in terminology definition because no speech can intrinsically be hateful. Before I go much further and I let this rabbit hole descend, I want to put some caveats out there in saying that I'm trying to create a very strict argument, and if any of you believe that you can change my mind, I welcome it. One of the main purposes that I start this channel off with is that we can have conversation. Whether it be just somebody who's 12 years old and wants to have a conversation or a learned scholar, I don't care. I'm open to having my mind changed on anything that I ever talk about or bring up, because if we don't have that in our life, then we're only shutting ourselves off to information. And we're no better than any type of culture or religion that would shut off the truth or information, or even just better social development, because we're unwilling to hear an opposing side. So if you think you have any way of convincing me otherwise to this argument, I am open to having my mind changed. Now, I'm going to read off hate speech as defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, and then I want to talk about this. And hate speech is defined by the Cambridge Dictionary that says, public speech that expresses hate or encourages violence towards a person or group based on something such as race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation. Now that is the source and that is the definition. Now I want to argue a couple of things here, just so that the layman understanding is out there, is that, in my opinion, you cannot say any string of words that every individual who hears those words back can consider those words hateful. I just wanted to throw an addendum in here as well, in that another comparable argument, and one that I'm trying to rely on, is something akin to offense or obscenity, in which that any type of media that you would show somebody, not every person would sit there and be able to objectively determine that the object or media that's being shown to them is causing offense. It is always to the subjective person's own determinations that they would extrapolate what the root cause of the speech or imagery used, that they could interpret that as being offensive. My example is this one simple one. I will try to make a more difficult explanation as well. If I were to walk up to somebody and say, "I hate you," that person now has to take my words and decipher why I said those words. But if I were to say to that person, "I hate you because I don't like your hair," any other person who watched this interaction might like that person's hair. So therefore, my speech is not hateful because other people don't see it as hateful. Maybe they say me as a person being hateful, or the characteristic of my speech having a malice intent, but those words that I said cannot intrinsically be hatefully conceived because other people don't find those words hateful. Maybe they agree with me and think that that hairdo is bad. Maybe they disagree. But considering those factors, you then can't consider that hate speech, even though hairstyle is not a protected characteristic of a person. Now, I want to go into a more difficult explanation based off of personal experience. I worked with another white man, and he one time openly expressed to me that he hates black people. Now, hearing those words, you intrinsically know that this person has either a racist thought or a bias against black people, and that is a very defined characteristic. And now, many people would call it hate speech. However, when we add context to the situation, this was the true story that he told me. He said, "I hate black people because I'm a gay man, and when I was walking on the streets in a downtown area, 2 times was I mugged and assaulted because I was gay and because people thought I had money on me." Now, knowing those words have changed the context of the story. This person is now biased against black folks because he had been assaulted and mugged multiple times. So can another person now hear that story and intrinsically think that that person has committed hate speech simply because what you've now done is created a difference in the speech? We would all understand from the story that he is now having racist thoughts towards black people. I will not argue that. I do not disagree with that statement because that is a fact. He is stating that he has a bias towards black people. But the context to that story is that he has created a bias, but he has created that bias due to very brutally negative circumstances. So do I consider the fact that he is hateful to black people, or the words that he uses to express hate to them? No. I would argue his speech is used as a byproduct to convey that he has a distrust. Now, one of the hard parts from my angle to defend is that, again, we are going back to the definition as according to the Cambridge Dictionary, public speech that expresses hate or encourages violence towards a person or group based on something such as race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation. Now, I cannot contest the one point, which is that he is expressing hate towards a character or a group of persons. But when personally talking to him, we had other coworkers who were of African American descent, and I believe Hispanic. I don't recall the story exactly. It was many years ago. But he did not then create a bias that made him unable to work with other people. He was just expressing that he has a bias towards a group of people due to the fact that he was mugged and assaulted multiple times. From my personal opinion, I don't believe you can earnestly take away that that person has created hate speech. Maybe with a context removed to that scenario, you could argue that somebody having a bias towards a group of people is hate speech. I would argue, though, when you contextualize the story, the intrinsic value of the words that are said do not indicate hatred. I would argue it creates a bias of all things, which you can consider hatred, but bias is a little bit more neutral here, and it lends itself to more nuance to say that this person would not have been hateful had this circumstance not occurred. Now, we don't know. We can't predict that scenario because it didn't happen. This individual was mugged and assaulted. But following over to another point that many other people like to bring up, which is incitement. There are many arguments to say that if you insert blank person into a negative stereotype or bias or attitude, you can incite other people to then attack people based on certain characteristics. And we don't protect that under the First Amendment. We cannot protect incitement because you are instructing. You are trying to sway opinions and try to cause an action to occur of that. When you're just using your freedom of speech or speech in general, it is up to the individual's person to interpret those words into either what your intent is or what your actionable statements are. But just saying words in and of itself, or maybe expressing your opinion, could not be legally perceived as any particular sway or dissent. Now, one thing I want to express, just to make sure that I'm not coming off as trying to protect racism or, actionable attacks against other people, is that there needs to be the distinction between the words that are said versus the actions that are taken. Now, you can correlate that hate speech is a thing, because societally and culturally, we accept that you being racist towards somebody is a hateful type of action. Therefore, if you are expressing racist words out of your mouth, that is hate speech. That is what culture and society has deemed as a thing. But I can only ever contest that saying your personal perception, the way you interpret the words or interpret the intentions of the person saying them, is what creates what you would call hate speech. But because you cannot intrinsically assign a value of hate to words said, that can't be legally interpreted as what the intention is behind the words. So if I say, I want to attack so-and-so over there, I have now expressed my intention to attack another person. If I am saying I hate protected class ABC, you now have to, in your mind, ascribe what I'm saying to me. But you don't know where or why I'm saying those words from. So therefore, I can't be hatefully speaking because you have to ascribe what the quote-unquote hate is of my statement. And if we cannot universally ascribe hateful intent from a string of words said, then it can't be hate speech. And that's my point really in an absolute breakdown, is that because we're very emotional people, ascribing intent behind words is so vastly different, it is difficult to ascertain intention behind opinions or expressions. And that's why we protect it under the First Amendment, is because there's so many ascriptions that we can make to the same words. We change words all the time. So if you believe that anything I said is wrong or incorrect, I encourage you, I implore you, please write a comment down below or tweet at me or send me a DM. I want to be able to argue this point against people. One of the greatest things I'm hoping to do from this channel is that I want to talk to just regular everyday people and see where their opinions lie. So I intend to make a multi-part series from every topic that I cover from this point on. So if you want me to continue talking on topics like this or specific points that I've made in prior videos, please talk to me. I am very open to having my mind changed. This is an opinion-based piece, and I want to go into some other things now. So from this point on in the audio, I am just kind of expressing some personal opinions and beliefs that I have towards this topic. Now, I understand entirely where the argument comes in that hate speech is a thing, because when you talk to people, the communication between two people, you need to be able to ascribe a value or a perception or a meaning behind those words. I 100% agree to that. I can't sit here and pretend that for a moment that we can't have people that, like, it doesn't exist that people are legitimately racist or have hatred towards people. I will never disagree to that point. They exist. They're bad people, in my opinion, because they're ignorant. But that's my problem with when it comes to what hate speech is defined under by our people. I think we allow people to just create definitions under their own narratives, their own assumptions, but we never stop back and go, wait. Who ascribed what you said, the intention behind what you said? And if we go back to the source, well, maybe we can find a reason that person said those words. Like in my particular story, the guy I worked with, like I said, he was homosexual and he was assaulted multiple times for being homosexual. Is it fair, in my opinion, for him to then be like blacklisted from ever having a job or ever working or trying to better himself? No, I think you say, well, these are unfortunate circumstances that you undertook, but as you can see, working with these other fellow African-American individuals, and I believe one Hispanic lady, I'm like, you can see that not all of them are bad people. They're fantastic people. I loved working with them, but like, why would you sit there and hold on to this hatred in your heart because you've had these bad instances? And do you think it's fair to sit there and tell somebody who's literally been stabbed, I believe he was stabbed, I could be misquoting that, I do apologize if I am, but mugged as well. Like, I can't find the circumstance to say that, well, because you've been literally injured and assaulted in your life, I have to now virtue signal that, being discriminatory is just inherently the worst thing you're doing right now. I can understand your story. I can understand your words. And my hope is that by just giving you gradual exposure and idle conversation, we can come back to getting to the point of going, hey, maybe you shouldn't discriminate against people. Because not everyone's bad. Not everyone's great, but not everyone's bad. And I think that we've lost ourselves to cancel culture ideology where we want the quick explanation, the quick definition. But when you sit and try to understand, and this is one of my favorite things from Daryl Davis, is that when you just try to educate them, and like I'm talking about racist people, not other people of color or protected ethnicities or classes, whatever. When you find legitimate racists, you got to educate them. You have to show them how amazing other people are of different cultures. I think it would be the greatest fallacy as a cook in my life that if we just said that Indian people are not allowed to bring their culture over here, we would be, and culinarily, we'd be awful. It would be atrocious. The amount of amazing food that have come in from the culture, the family values from the Indian culture. I'm like, I hate the idea of living in a world where people are allowed to discriminate. Now, that being said, we have so many legal protections in place that help protect people who are being discriminated against. And there's societal cultural arguments. Again, I try really hard to take a moderate position on this one. I am not arguing in any particular side that racism happens. People don't get hired because they're blank class. One of the biggest racist things I'm seeing right now is people saying that we're only hiring black people for this position. I'm like, you do realize that's racist, but these people have gone so far to the one side that they say, well, no, this isn't racist, this is rebalancing. I'm like, but if we have a conversation and I ask you, would you hire an Asian person? And you say, no, that's racist. And subsequently, I think there's these kind of lunatics who sit there and be like, oh, racism doesn't really exist anymore, when there's clear evidence of civil lawsuits that exist of people of color suing companies, employers, because they can't get jobs. I'm like, and the history of redlining and discrimination towards black folks with trying to get home ownership loans. It's evident. It exists. And there's so many people that sit there and pretend that it doesn't exist. And I try to stand in the point of going, yes, there are a lot of racists still. But if you do a per capita analysis of now versus 20 years ago, 40, 60, 80, you just find so fewer instances of it occurring now that we're getting so much better. And I hate seeing this ideology, and I'm depressed, I'll talk about this in a second, with the Terry Crews circumstance, is that we are on a pendulum swing. We exist in this perpetual pendulum where it's like one side's got to take the other side, and then it overcorrects way too hard to go to the other side. And I'm one of these people who says, why don't we stop the pendulum? And this is what I felt like Terry Crews was trying to say. Now, I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I'm not. But he said that if we want to work together to create equality for people, we need to work with white people. If we only take away white supremacy, all we're doing is creating black supremacy. And that's my argument of a pendulum, is that if you have a situation where there's more white people clearly being racist and trying to put down other people of color, you can't then swing the pendulum the other way and say, well, it's our turn now to do that. Well, you've not changed the problem. You've just changed the hands of who holds the power. And I think that's where we get to a point where I try to sit there and grandstand, because that's what this feels like. And it feels like I'm grandstanding by trying to be like, hey guys, why don't we stop the pendulum swing, when there's people who sit there and are earnestly hurt from years and years of legitimate racism. I hear stories all the time from my friends who have been like, I'm an Asian guy, I'm in college, and the amount of racism I experience. I've had friends like that. I've talked to them. It exists. It is a thing. And I don't sit here and pretend that it doesn't exist. I do, however, like to counter with something else by saying, as a white person, I experience hatred too. It exists. And when you pretend that it doesn't on our end, when you pretend there aren't instances that occur for the other side, you are then arguing whataboutism. Well, I've been discriminated against, so what about me? Or I've been discriminated, what about me? We've created a circular system where all we're doing is trying to eat each other. And I will leave off with one last point about hate speech. Hate speech is almost the equivalent to what I would call as cyberbullying. And to say that what you equate the language to mean to you is how it will ever be defined as you. If I am walking in a neighborhood of people and I am insulted based on my race or gender or ethnicity or whatever, then I have to ascribe how much offense or personal takeaway I take from those words. Now, I don't have the history of black folks being enslaved for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I don't exactly know. I am not a historian. I'm not a person who follows Islam and has to constantly argue or live in a country of Judeo-Christian people and constantly protect my way of life. I don't live in these worlds. But one thing that all people should adopt when living in the United States of America is the ideology of the Constitution, the First Amendment, which is that words need to be free. If we ever intentionally ascribe something terrible to a word, all we've done now is created a crux or a taboo to that word. Thinking of something atrocious, whatever you might insert in your own mind as to what the word or whatever the opinion or the label that puts your group or your person down, you have to keep in mind that you ascribe that value to that word. Not everyone does. And when it comes to figuring out how do we speak to each other, we should never ascribe that to anyone else. We should ascribe it to ourselves and explain to other people how you might find words offensive, or the historical context, or the malice intent that's been used behind that word. An example being when Trump was tweeting out, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." That on a surface level just seems like a statement. But when people dug into it, they come to find out that that phrase had been used by white supremacists as a means to curb black rioters. Do I think it unfair to go after Trump for saying those words and saying, hey, historically these have been used to specifically target minorities and put them down and to not allow them to rise up in any capacity? No. But to sit there and say, we need to block the ability for those words to be seen, to be understood, to allow people to disinfect. As I like to say, sunlight is one of the best disinfectants when it comes to this type of stuff. I think it was completely ignorant for Twitter to take that stance and not allow the people to sit there and educate other people who may have seen those words and thought, well, yeah, I kind of agree. Well, people's minds can be changed. And one of the greatest things that I saw from people responding to that was saying, hey, this was historically used by people to put down black rioters. Maybe we shouldn't say that phrase because it does have a historical intent behind it. And I feel like that's one of the greatest things we can stand and learn is that words can have meaning, but they shouldn't be interpreted as hateful, because hateful is what you ascribe to it.